Hello, and welcome to What Would Aristotle Do? Following on from my previous video, where I responded to Alex O'Connor's views on emotivism, today I want to talk about Spencer Greenberg's interview with Marcus Davis. I've been a long-time listener of Spencer's podcast, Clearer Thinking with Spencer Greenberg. Although he sits way too far over in the consequentialist part of the room for me, I find his approach and his insights to be very useful. And let's not forget that the use of the rational mind forms a key part of the cardinal virtue of prudence or wisdom. You can find out about Marcus Davis online, but for those of you who can't bear to click away from my riveting prose for even a second, let me tell you that he's the head of a think tank called Rethink Priorities, which tries to get rich people to do effective altruism stuff. And effective altruism, for those of you who don't know, is an ideology that believes that it is possible to calculate what is the best way to give money to charity. And more than that, you can calculate what is the best way to spend your time, that is what job you should do, to earn as much money as possible so that you can give more to your EA charity of choice. And it always turns out to be mosquito nets in sub-Saharan Africa, by the way. Now, I'm being more than a little unkind to the effective altruists here. I actually find a lot of their work really interesting and useful. For instance, effective altruists did a bunch of research a few years ago that found that, amazingly, the main problem that poor people have is that they don't have enough money. If you give them money, in general, they spend it in ways that make them better off. They don't fritter it away on drugs and fast cars and meals at Michelin-starred restaurants. Turns out it's rich people who do that. Another surprising finding from the EA crowd is that the main problem that homeless people have is that they don't have anywhere to live. Sort that out and their other problems become much easier to solve. Anyway, on to the podcast. The first argument that Marcus makes is that you shouldn't help people in Chicago that are suffering from lead poisoning because it's much cheaper to help people in Africa that are in danger of catching malaria. Yes, it's those mosquito nets again. Now, for me, this is one example of the repugnant conclusions that are going to come up several times in this talk. So let's unpack what's being said here. What he's saying is that you should not help poor people who are unlucky enough to live in rich countries. It's kind of the charities equivalent of global capitalism. Rich people move their money around the world to find the cheapest place to manufacture goods, which are sold back into wealthy countries. The logical conclusion of this argument is we should only give money to charities working in Burundi, and as soon as they have become slightly wealthier than Malawi, we should transfer our attentions to the poor of Malawi. One can only imagine the wealthy people of Chicago walking past the canvassers for charities working to make lead poisoning a thing of the past and thinking smugly, yes, in theory, it's a good cause. Unfortunately, it's just not efficient. So what's the virtue ethics view on this? Well, Aristotle's philosophy was very much community-based. So I think that he would say that in general, you should try and help people within your own community. Who gets help and what kind of help is a matter for the application of the virtues of justice, wisdom, and moderation. Now, whoa, I hear you say. Isn't this just like J.D. Vance's philosophy of family, community, and country? Well, it might sound similar, but there's one key difference. Implicit in the way that Vance frames his duty to family, community, and country is a belief in the Schmittian concept of the friend-enemy distinction. People who are close to you are, by definition, friends. Those who are far away are enemies. So you should not just be indifferent to those who are far away from you, you should treat them as enemies who are in competition with you for a scarce resource, in this case, all the resources of the world. Vance is similar to many right-wing thinkers. He sees the world as being driven by scarcity and human interactions as zero-sum. That is, the only way that I can win is if you lose. Aristotle would say that people who are far away from you have just as much right to be treated justly as anyone. The problem is a practical one. The further away someone is, the harder it is to know exactly what it means to treat them justly. Marcus and Spencer then go on to discuss whether it is moral to give money to charities that are not concerned directly with saving people's lives. The example that they give is giving money to put on, quote, a fancy art performance for relatively rich people in Chicago, New York, or London. At face value, this seems like an argument that is worthy of consideration. I remember people having these kind of arguments when I was a student. How can you go out and enjoy yourself when there are people starving in Africa? The problem with this argument is you could say that any expenditure which is not to do with staying alive or helping the people in whatever benighted part of the world you have decided it's cheapest to save a life can be branded as immoral. Hey, you, effective altruist, I see you've just bought a coffee. What's wrong with drinking from a puddle? Don't you care about children getting malaria? The logical end point of this argument is that you turn into some kind of worker bee, which is completely focused on donating to causes that save the most lives for the least amount of money. The only reason you would have children would be for them to carry on your work. If one of them decides that they don't want to live a life that's devoid of any joy or colour, then cast them out immediately. It's fine. They live in a rich country. I'm sure someone will pick up the slack. And of course, if everyone was to follow the example of the effective altruist, the economy would collapse, and there wouldn't be any money to buy those blessed mosquito nets. For the virtue ethicist, the way out of this particular repugnant conclusion is twofold. Firstly, we should remember that humans have a telos, that is an essence, the thing that makes us human. Our essence includes a love of art, music, dancing, damn fine coffee. Without all of these things and many, many more, we would cease to be human. We would become like the Borg in Star Trek. The flourishing of the individual would be irrelevant. All that would matter would be that the greatest number of us survived. Secondly, we should remember the cardinal virtue of moderation. Of course, we shouldn't give all our spare money to arts charities, or use every penny to buy Taylor Swift tickets for that matter, but neither should we slave every working minute to earn money to save people we will never see in a land far away. We should obviously give money to charity, but we should also spend money on things that nourish our souls, like trying to find the perfect Empire biscuit / flat white combo. No? Just me then. The pair then go on to extrapolate their argument by saying, what if the art event is for the richest person in the world and him alone? Surely then you can see that it's better off to spend money saving the lives of people than giving the most well-off person a tiny boost in their personal happiness. Now this is a kind of argument I find really annoying. I call it the argument from infinities. Sam Harris uses this type of argument in his book, The Moral Landscape. He starts by asking the reader to imagine a world of the worst possible misery for everyone. He then argues that we should all agree that this is bad. He then says that proves moral values are kinds of facts and that moral relativism is false. He then goes on to argue that the moral thing to do is to work to move society away from the worst possible misery for everyone towards a point of maximum well-being for everyone. My issue with this argument is we don't live and have never lived in the worst possible world for everyone. If we did live in such a world, of course the best course of action would be to work to extricate us from that world. Although, come to think about it, what about a world where one person lived the most perfect life imaginable and everyone else lived in the worst possible misery? Using Sam's consequentialism, this would be better than the worst possible misery for everyone. Now, I would argue that paradoxically, this world would worsen the misery for everyone else, because at least in the world of the worst possible misery for everyone, we're all in it together. And the reason I characterize it as an argument from infinity is that once you're at infinity, you can add and subtract finite numbers and you still end up with infinity. Start with infinite misery, subtract a large number because everyone's life has now just got worse because now they can see that one person is having a good time, add on the happiness value for that one person and you still have infinity. Returning to Marcus and Spencer's argument, of course I'm not going to donate money to a foundation that plans to clone Maria Callas, give her the finest opera training money can buy in order to give a single concert for Elon Musk. If he wants that, he can do it himself. The real world is neither absolute hell for everyone, nor is it a utopia where everyone's wants and needs are satisfied in the best way possible. For the vast majority of people, it's somewhere in the middle. There are people who could be helped by a relatively small amount of money. But let's put this into perspective. The so-called most efficient EA charity, the Mosquito Net one, takes about $5,000 to save one life. If you only have $10 to give, you've a 1 in 500 chance that it will save a life and a 499 in 500 chance that it will do nothing at all. I'm not going to be shamed into feeling bad about giving that money to the local community arts centre because that stuff is important too. So, after going down this Singerian rabbit hole for a bit, they step back and say, yeah, you shouldn't go to extremes. You should have other stuff in your life as well as giving money to charity. I couldn't agree more. And I rather wish they had started with that appeal to moderation. I would not have got so hot under the collar and started shouting at the podcast. Next, they go into Peter Singer's famous drowning child thought experiment, along with some of the well-known variants. For those of you who are unfamiliar with this, the drowning child scenario goes like this. You are passing a pond one day and you hear the cries of a drowning child. You can easily wade in and save the child, but that would ruin your expensive new shoes. Should you do it or not? Well, of course you should. People would think of you as a monster if you refused to save the life of a child because it would cost you £150 for a new pair of shoes. So why do you think it's okay not to spend the same amount of money saving the life of a child that happens to be far away from you? Now, I think there's a good consequentialist argument to be had here about why the child in front of you is not the same as the child that's far away, but I don't want to get into that here. I'll just say that I think that the average person's intuition that the act of actually saving a child's life that's right in front of you is qualitatively different to sending a text message to donate money that has a fairly low percentage chance of saving a child's life is actually correct. Nobody is going to thank you for donating £150 to charity via your phone. apart from maybe an automated answer bot. But if you actually saved a child from drowning, you'd probably be the lead item on the local television news. I'd also say that shaming people into giving money to charity is not the best way to go about things. Just for fun, I'd like to add my own spin on the drowning child thought experiment. What if you're rushing to the bank to deposit a cheque for £50,000 because there's a billionaire who's promised to match every donation to the mosquito net charity? The catch is that the deadline is tonight and you've only just got enough time to get to the bank before it closes. Now, by stopping to save the drowning child, you condemn 10 people to dying from malaria because you will miss out on the match funds. And I think that the learning that we can take from this is that you can prove anything that you want with thought experiments. The next thing that they say is that when it comes to determining what is the right thing to do in a given situation, that different moral theories would come up with different actions. If you follow Kantian deontology, you should be following the rules. If you're a consequentialist, you should be calculating the action that results in the greatest happiness for the greatest number. Virtue ethicists should be doing the thing that is most virtuous. Because of this, Marcus suggests that there should be a way of combining the different philosophies, so you do something that's 40% following the rules, that's deontology, 30% consequentialism, and 30% virtue ethics. My response to this approach is virtue ethics. In virtue ethics, you are supposed to take into account the rules of the society you live in, and you are supposed to use your rationality to figure out what the best outcome is. The special sauce that virtue ethics adds is the virtues. The clue's in the name. Rather than combining the recommendations of the different approaches according to some equations, where the proportions you assign are necessarily going to be pretty arbitrary, you have a set of principles, that is, the virtues, that give you a guide as to what a good outcome actually is. You ask, would this action be just for the people involved? How do I work that out? I use my rationality. If I follow this action, am I being a coward or am I being reckless? Or am I demonstrating the right amount of courage? Have I used my rational brain to figure out as best as I can what the best action is to take? And have I engaged my practical wisdom to check what pure rationality proposes makes sense? Is the thing I am thinking of doing extreme in any sense, or does it seem to follow the path of moderation? The final thing that caught my attention in this podcast is the part of the conversation where Spencer and Marcus talked about using models for making decisions. What does this mean? Basically, it means that when you want to make a decision, you think about all the things you want and don't want as outcomes of the decision. Then you decide how important it is that any option you want to consider matches the things you want to a greater or lesser extent. Then you look at all the options and pick the one that best matches the things that you want. You can turn this into a model by assigning a score of, say, 1 to 10 to the things that you want relative to how much you want them. So the thing that you want the solution to do most gets 10, and all the other things you want are scored relative to that. Then for each option, you score how much it fulfills the things that you want. Then you create a spreadsheet to work out the total score, and hey presto, you've picked the best option. As an example, say you're buying a new car. You decide that the most important thing for you is how fast it goes, and the only other thing you care about is how comfortable it is. So you give how fast it goes a score or a weighting of 10. You think about how much you want comfort compared to speed. You decide you only care about it half as much, so you give comfort a weighting of 5. You look at two options, car A and car B. Car A will do 180 mile per hour. Car B tops out at 160 mile an hour. So car A scores 10 times 10, which equals 100, and car B scores 7 times 10, so that's 70. For comfort, you take car A for a test drive and it feels horrible. You can feel every bump going straight up through your spine. Car B feels very firm, but you do think you could drive it on normal roads for a day. Car A feels like a racetrack only car. So car B scores 10 times 5, equaling 50, and car A scores 2 times 5, which is 10. Add them up, car A gets a total of 110, while car B scores 120. So even though car A is faster and speed is the most important thing to you, you should still choose car B because on balance it's a better fit for you. Now don't get me wrong, I'm a fan of using models for decision making. The process I outlined just now is from Kepner-Trigo problem solving and decision making. I was trained in using these methods for my work and used them many times with generally pretty good results. Where I differ from Marcus and Spencer is in the enthusiasm that they express for making the models complex. When you're applying this process to something like buying a car, at the end of the day, you know what a car looks like and what it does. You have previous experience of driving cars, so you know what you like and what you don't. The biggest risk is that you don't buy the best car that you could possibly have bought, but you can be pretty sure that you will end up with a pretty good car anyway. When it comes to more complex decisions, like deciding which charity will make the best use of its donations, you have the problem of uncertainty. Say the charity is asking for funding for a new project. It's in a field that they haven't worked in before and in a country that they haven't been in before. You can look at their track record of successfully completing new projects in new countries, but you can never be sure how that track record will transfer to another country. Maybe they were lucky in the past. Maybe the previous projects were done by a particularly skilled team that is no longer working for the charity. It's really hard to get to know those things, and it's extremely difficult to judge what the effect will be, even if you do. What Spencer and Marcus propose is that you add these uncertainties into the model as extra variables. These extra variables are like throwing dice. Throw a 6 and you get more benefit from the project than you expected. Throw a 1 and you get no benefit at all. Now in reality, the modelling is more complicated than that, but hopefully you get my point. Marcus and Spencer seem to agree that the more of these uncertainties you identify and incorporate into your model, the more likely it is that the model will predict the outcome in the real world. Now this is where I'm afraid I think they're making a mistake. I have seen similar mistakes made throughout my work life. I used to lead teams producing complex software products. Through the 60s, 70s and 80s, software development was fraught with problems. The majority of large software projects were late, and when they arrived, delivered much less than promised for much more money. Now, if you're interested in this, there's a famous report called the Standish Chaos Report, which goes into detail about this. Throughout this era, people thought that the problem was they weren't putting in enough effort to specifying, that is, writing down exactly what the software was meant to do and exactly how it was meant to do it. Through those decades, large corporations spent more and more money on a process which came to be known as big design up front. All this money, time and effort didn't result in better software delivered on time. In fact, it seemed to make the situation worse. The problem was that when you are writing down what the software is supposed to do, it's very hard to imagine what it will look like, especially if you haven't seen much software before. One of the jobs I had was working for a world-renowned cultural institution. While I was there, I was asked to review an invitation to tender that another team had put together for a multi-million-pound project. This invitation included a 600-page specification of what the software was supposed to do. By all accounts, this specification had taken 11 months to complete. I had a quick flick through, and within 10 minutes had found 4 or 5 inconsistencies in the specification. I told the team that they should reserve 30% of the budget for fixing things after the contract was awarded. The team told me there was no contingency, the budget was the budget. The outcome? The supplier completed the contract and the software didn't work. They hired their own team of developers and a really good project manager and spent the next 2 years fixing the problems. Another problem is that some of the things that software has to do depend on how the software is going to work. Just imagine that you want people to be able to pay for your revolutionary drone-based hedge cutting service via cryptocurrency. At the point of specifying what the software is supposed to do, you will not have specified which crypto exchange you're going to connect to. You won't know what errors can happen and which ones you can deal with automatically and which ones you have to ask the customer to try again. So you make an assumption. You make several assumptions. You assume the crypto exchange will act in a certain way based on your experience of using other kinds of payment gateways. This might be a good assumption or it might be a bad one. Hidden under this are a lot of other assumptions. You're assuming that your procurement department can both choose the best crypto gateway and negotiate a contract with them in time for your developers to start using it. You're assuming that the support will be easy to get when you find that the gateway doesn't work as you expect, and by the way, this always happens. You assume that you can have access to test accounts so that you don't end up spending a fortune testing the software and getting it working. You can make guesses about how likely you are to have problems in all of these areas, and you can also guess how much effect they have on the timescale. But the fundamental problem is that the assumptions are not independent. Change one thing and a whole load of assumptions become invalid, or another set come into play. Say the assumption that you're going to use a crypto exchange proves to be wrong, because there's a major crash in one of the exchanges after you've started to develop the software. So instead, you decide you're going to interface directly with Bitcoin, because one Bitcoin is worth a vast amount of money. It was over £58,000 at the time I was writing this, and because the Bitcoin system can only process between 3 and 7 transactions per second, you have to bundle up the transactions. And effectively, you're writing your own crypto exchange, which is obviously a lot more difficult and raises all sorts of other problems the development team would never have considered before. The fundamental problem is that whenever you are thinking about anything that you actually haven't done yet, you have to face the fact that the outcome is uncertain. Even if it's something that you do every day, like making a cup of tea, there is uncertainty. Your flatmate may have used the last tea bag. The kettle might stop working before the water boils. If you think about it, there are two sources of uncertainty. There are things that are true now that you don't know. Are there any tea bags in the tin? You can easily reduce that type of uncertainty by checking. The other kind of uncertainty relates to things that might happen in the future. You can map out areas of uncertainty, and that's worth doing, although you will inevitably not think of all the ways that the thing you're thinking of doing can go wrong. In fact, you will end up spending valuable time thinking about things that realistically you can do nothing about. There could be an alien invasion that prevents you making your cup of tea, but If that were to happen, I'd bet that a cup of tea would be the last thing on your mind. I think that when people identify these uncertainties and assign a finger in the air probability to them happening, in their heads they've dealt with them. Then, when they've done the maths and one option has a higher score than the other, they really think that they are choosing the best option. In reality, this may not be true, because the thing that they were assigning a probability to was not the chance of something bad happening, but the extent of their own ignorance. Take an example. Here are two cars. Which looks the faster? Is it the Chevy Corvette with its swoopy lines, or is it the suburban family favourite, the Volvo V70? If you don't know a lot about cars, you'd definitely say that it was the Corvette. In your model, you might say there's a 90% chance that the Corvette has a top speed of over 150, and there's only a 20% chance of the Volvo being able to reach that speed. In fact, the Corvette tops out at 130 miles an hour, while the Volvo is limited to a top speed of 155. The error is that you're assigning probabilities that aren't really governed by chance. There is a fact of the matter, you just don't know what it is. What you are assigning probabilities to is your own ignorance, and everyone, apart from Socrates, will consistently underestimate that. So, what is the virtue ethics answer to all this? It's a combination of the cardinal virtues of moderation and prudence. You have to do enough planning, but not too much. US President Eisenhower said, "Plans are worthless, but planning is everything." You do enough planning so you have a fair idea of what you're dealing with and you are aware of where the uncertainties are. Then you plan to stay light on your feet so that you can react quickly and smoothly to anything that the future may throw up, whether that's from your ignorance or from sheer bad luck. That's the contingency budget from my software development example that I talked about earlier. How much planning is enough? Well, that's where practical wisdom comes in. When you first start to make a complex decision, you will probably need to do as much planning or modelling as you can. Unless, of course, you do so much that you end up never making a decision. After the decision is made and the outcome is clear, you analyse your mistakes as dispassionately as possible and you learn from them. Once you've done this a few times, you will be well on the way to gaining practical wisdom. When I started out as a computer programmer, completing a programming task would take me 3 times as long as I expected it would. After 35 years in the game, I could reliably help a team of a dozen developers get their estimate to within 10 or 20% of the actual outcome. As Samuel Beckett said, "Ever tried? Ever failed? No matter. Try again, fail better." Well, I hope that gave you some food for thought. If you have anything that you'd like to share, especially if you think I've missed something, please comment below. And if you've got this far, thank you for watching What Would Aristotle Do? The next episode will be on prudence, practical wisdom, and the intellectual virtues.